Right, Giorgione. Born Giorgio Barberini da Castelfranco in 1477, and he died in 1510. He was an Italian painter of the Venetian school during the High Renaissance, who died of the plague in his 30s. None of his paintings were signed, and only a few paintings have been firmly attributed to Giorgione. With his younger contemporary Titian, he founded the Venetian school of Italian Renaissance painting, characterized by its expression of mood through color. What little is known of Giorgione's life we owe to Vasari's Lives of the Artists. He came from a small town of Castelfranco, some 30 miles from Venice. His name sometimes appears as Zosso, meaning Big George, so he could have been tall. He probably served his apprenticeship under Bellini in Venice, and his talent was certainly recognized as early as 1500, when he was chosen to paint portraits of the Doge. Vasari tells us it was in that year that he met Leonardo da Vinci. By all accounts, his work compared favorably with Leonardo's. All agree that Giorgione, also referenced as a musician, by the way, was distinguished by charm, touched with poetic melancholy, or so it was reported at the time by Vasari. Giorgione died of the plague in 1510. He was a contemporary of Raphael, who was 6 years younger and also died of a fever in his 30s, perhaps also the plague. Now we need to get used to this phrase, which some of you perhaps not familiar with, Sfumato. Giorgione used an innovative fine technique called Sfumato, a fine application of color which produces soft, imperceptible transitions between hues and tones, sometimes resulting in a smoky perspective, while the background fades into the distance. Now, Da Vinci used the same technique in the early 16th century. You can see below the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. It's believed Da Vinci used washes of oil-based tints to slowly build up and mold the sfumato effect. So what this effect gives us is a very soft outline, as you can see, especially with the Mona Lisa on the left there, and soft tones of skin color and, well, everything really. So we're going to get used to this. And it's in sharp contrast to chiaroscuro, of course, which we see later with the likes of Gentileschi and Caravaggio using. So we'd like to keep that in mind as we wander through Giorgione's paintings. Now, this painting is an early painting, 1502, and it's a double portrait. We see two contrasting faces expressing, perhaps in the former, the one nearest to the viewer, introversion, and possibly as an extrovert in the face of the youth behind, although there is something slightly mendacious about that face to me, as almost as though he's plotting something against the youth in front. Draped around the central column, the composition appears unbalanced, as one might expect in an early work. Not everyone attributes this painting to Giorgione, but the soft light color tones of the sfumato technique suggest it probably is an early work. So if I go quiet for a moment, it's just that I'm letting you absorb the painting as I say, we haven't got many paintings to look at this morning, so we can take a leisurely stroll through the early part of the High Renaissance. From his hometown of Castelfranco, Giorgione painted the Castelfranco Madonna. This was his only altarpiece. And as you can see, the Madonnas enthroned and saints on either side form the classical equilateral triangle effect that we've come across this many times in these talks. And there we are. There's the triangle effect. As you can see, the Sfumato technique is not so quite apparent in this painting. And the colors are very rich, particularly the Madonna, and we've got the very typically complementary colors of red and green there, which always work well. The checkered floor. And the other thing I want to particularly point out with this painting is the landscape behind. Now, the landscape is towards the top of the painting, but you're going to see in many of Giorgione's paintings, the landscape is given great prominence, which is unusual for that time. And Giorgione has been called the first great landscape painter on that basis. Well, not a great landscape painter, but perhaps the first painter to use landscape for its own sake. Typical of all Giorgione's attributed works is the Sleeping Venus, now in Dresden. It was first recognized by Giovanni Morelli and is now universally accepted as the same painting seen by Marcantonio Michael and later by Ridolfo, Giorgione's 17th century biographer, in the Casa Marcello at Venice. We're told an exquisitely pure and severe rhythm of line and contour chastens the sensuous richness of the painting. The sweep of the white drapery in which the goddess lies is very fine, as is the glowing landscape that fills the space behind her. And so the landscape is given much more prominence with this painting. The use of this landscape to frame the nude is highly innovative at the time. Most paintings concentrated on allegory or historical themes. He paints the Venus shrouded in sleep, masking any conscious facial expression, as you can see. So she's serenely asleep there. It's recorded by Michael that Giorgione left this piece unfinished, and the landscape was actually completed after his death by Titian. Since his first creation, the Sleeping Venus has inspired many great works of art. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with these paintings. Perhaps not the Jacopo Palmer 1520 version, but you can see how it owes a lot to Giorgione's Sleeping Venus. Then we've got the Titian in the top left-hand corner there, which is painted some years later. And then we have the Velasquez in the top right corner. But of course, the Venus is, she's still draped across the couch, but she's got her back to us in this case. Then we have the Goya in the center there, that we saw in the last talk. This is the Goya nude, of course. Goya famously clothed and a second version. And then Manet's Olympia, it's been said, owes much to the sleeping Venus, and maybe the Titian as well. The same concept of idealized beauty is evoked in the strangely pensive Judith, which is you can find in the Hermitage Museum. It's a large painting which exhibits Giorgione's special qualities of rich color and the new romance of the landscape behind, while demonstrating that life and death are constant companions as well as opposites. It was originally thought that this painting was done by Raphael, but now universally it's agreed that it's a painting by Giorgione. It's an unusual depiction of Judith. We've seen Judith and Holofernes before. If you remember the story that the Assyrian general in charge of the Assyrian army is about to invade Israel, and Judith seduces him into her tent, and rather than plies him with drinks, but all he gets out of it is a decapitated head. And there's, we see the decapitated head. She's got her foot on use it as a footrest. We've seen this many times over the years, particularly I'm thinking of Gentileschi and Caravaggio's versions, which are far more gory and realistic. This is quite idealized. In fact, you'd have to look hard to find the Holofernes' presence in this painting. Apart from an altarpiece and his frescoes, all Giorgione's surviving works are small paintings designed for the wealthy Venetian collector to keep in their home. Obviously, this is not one of them. Giorgione was the first major Italian painter to concentrate his work on his clientele, to such an extent that soon after his death, the size of Italian paintings began to generally increase, commensurate with the prosperity of patrons and palaces. This painting is called the Tempest. We can see the Tempest in the middle at the top there, brewing up, getting itself into rather a lather of rage, though it's largely a rural setting and a landscape, though we got the two figures at the bottom, the corner there. It's actually been called the first landscape in the history of Western painting. Maybe that's claiming too much for it. Anyway, the subject of this painting is unclear, but its artistic mastery is nonetheless apparent. The Tempest portrays a man and a woman breastfeeding her baby on either side of a stream amid a city's rubble and incoming storm. Attributions date from soon after Giorgione's death, when some of his paintings were completed by other artists. The small works which make up the bulk of Giorgione's oeuvre were less likely to be recorded, of course. Other artists continued to work in his style for some years, and by the mid-century, mid-16th century, fakes began to proliferate. The Venetian collector Marcantonio Michael, already mentioned, identified 12 paintings and one drawing as being by Giorgione, of which this Tempest was one. So you can see as opposed to the altarpiece which we saw earlier, the colors are quite muted, especially the greens. this painting, this building on the left there is definitely leaning, as opposed to the other buildings. The other lines in this painting are pretty well well defined and upright. The Three Philosophers. Now, its attribution to Giorgione is still disputed, though Michael, the Venetian collector, said it was mostly painted by Giorgione, but Sebastiano da Piombo finished it, according to him. Submodern writers also implicate Titian in its completion. The three figures stand near a dark, empty cave. This cave is sometimes, on the left there, is sometimes interpreted as Plato's cave, with the iconic shadows vis-a-vis his philosophy. And these three characters as the three Magi. They seem to be lost in a typical Giorgione dreamy mood, reinforced by a hazy light characteristic of his other landscapes. So the colors are quite bold. The colors of the three philosophers are quite bold. As you can see, we got the red complemented by the green of the seated philosopher here, who seems to be dabbling with one or two instruments. And his attention is certainly fixed on this cave. So our attention also follows his gaze, but there's nothing depicted in the cave itself. So it might well be the Plato reference is relevant, but this can simply be somebody's construct in the centuries since it was painted. Notice the blue. I mean, blue is always used for distance, but that's quite a bold blue. It doesn't really work. It stands out. It takes the eye. It distracts. And then we've got hidden in the landscape there in the forest, we've got a church, what appears to be a church, or it could be a chateau. But there's no doubt that the emphasis of this painting are the three philosophers. This painting is called Pastoral Concert. Now it's in the Louvre. And the Louvre tells us it reveals the Venetians' love of textures, because the painter renders the appearance of flesh, fabric, wood, stone, and foliage almost palpable. Well, the painting is certainly devoid of harsh contours, and its treatment of the landscape has been compared to pastoral poetry, hence the title of the painting. Actually, this is quite a large painting, despite what I said earlier about Giorgione's generally being small. It's 40 by 53. So these three figures, I take this one to be a woman, the nude figure to be a woman. They're making music in the center of the painting, a lutist there, and she is a flautist, and we don't know what musical instrument the figure in the center is using. It may be he's singing, but his mouth appears to be closed. On the extreme right, we've got a shepherd with a couple of sheep, just for human interest, I suppose. Not that we need human interest, because that's all there is in this painting, apart from the background landscape. quite what this semi-nude woman is doing, and what this edifice is here, I'm not sure. But she seems to be pouring water into this container. I hasten to use the word concrete, but that's what it looks like to me. And then we got these buildings in the center there. But the colors, as opposed to the Three Philosophers, the colors of the drapery are quite muted, aren't they? So the whole painting gives that sort of dreamy, wistful feeling to it. Notice how, with the nude figure, the flautist, how there's the line of the face has been made very clear by a dark, rather unsubtle brushstroke. Laura is the only painting which actually bears a date, and the date is 1506, as you can see. Giorgione and Titian both revolutionized the genre of portrait painting, though it's often difficult to differentiate their work. Many of Giorgione's pictures can be read as types designed to express a mood or atmosphere rather than a faithful representation. We shall see more portraits as we proceed through Giorgione's oeuvre. We got the contrast of red and green again here in this painting, and notice the fur is skillfully, the fur collar is very skillfully painted, I think. We don't know who she is, but it is thought to be a young bride. And we notice the stylized foliage that provides a backcloth to her head. For some reason, she's exposing a right breast. I'm not quite sure why she's doing that. Rather forward for a bride, I would have thought. Even more striking is this portrait of a young man, now in Berlin, acclaimed by art historians. And I wrote for Giorgione, and I quote from the gallery label. The indescribably subtle expression of serenity and the immobile features add to the chiseled effect of the silhouette and modeling. That's what the Berlin Gallery has to say about this young man. It has nothing to say that I can find about these two V's. It could be the initials of his name, possibly. I like the pale lilac of his tunic. And he's got a slightly androgynous face, it seems to me, but his hair is very well coiffed, as you can see. Now we come to the rest of Giorgione's paintings, the attribution of which is to a greater or lesser extent contested even today. So we'll look at them in chronological order. Whether Giorgione painted them wholly himself, or they were from his studio, or in part by Titian, need not concern us. We'll simply look at them as early 16th century paintings in the High Renaissance in Vienna. So this is the first, the Holy Family. And typical of Giorgione is the landscape that we see through the window there, and the soft outlines, the sfumato effect. But the colors are very bold in this painting, as we, in contrast to some of the drapery we've seen in the last few paintings. Notice the yellows used in the ground, depiction of the ground, of the soil, the sand, or whatever it is, or the soil. So this painting was painted in 1500 at the right at the turn of the century. Here we have Madonna reading. Through the window can be seen the river Sciavone, the Doge's palace, and the San Marco Campanile. There we are. The blue of the Madonna's cloak and clothes is quite muted in this painting, although the yellow is striking. And the red is also, compared to the previous painting, the red is also somewhat muted. As I say, bear in mind that whether these are exclusively Giorgione attributions or not, we don't know. I mean, the problem is he never signed any of his paintings, so that's there's no way of telling from that point of view anyway. But he may well have painted the whole of this painting. This is an interesting painting, The Three Ages of Man. The title is from the 17th century, so it wasn't originally on the carried on the painting. And the attribution, of course, as I say, is still disputed to this day. It's been suggested that the painting depicts a singing lesson, or even that the young boy is Marcus Aurelius. He's reading from a folio on which are drawn 2 rules of a music staff. You can't really see them from this reproduction, but take my word for it, they are there. So the man to the left is pointing most definitely to this music, and an old man on the right, a man on the right in the green is pointing to the music, and the man on the left is looking straight at us for whatever reason. So it's not surprising that it's been given the title of The Three Ages of Man, because we've got the 3 ages of man, but it could just as easily be called the music lesson, I would have thought. And I don't understand, and I've been able to trace why this character in the front is thought to be Marcus Aurelius necessarily. An interesting painting nonetheless. No landscape in the background of this. It's an interior painting, presumably. The light is, the figures are lit from the front. The Test of Fire of Moses. This is an interesting painting. The episode is taken from the Talmud. This bizarre episode in the life of Moses depicts him as a baby who apparently knocked the crown off the Pharaoh's head. As a punishment, he is bizarrely being made to put a hot coal in his mouth. So I've blown that part of the painting so that you can see that those are supposed to be hot coals, and these well, he's been allowed to pick one up, so I suppose he's about to scream blue murder any minute as soon as he finds that they're very hot. The myth has it that because he had put these coals in his mouth, it caused Moses to stammer the rest of his life. It's considered, if we switch back to the actual painting on the left, it's thought the figures on the left of this painting, here we are, these figures, are by Giorgione. But the figures on the right, these three figures here, are not, simply because they're considered to be not so well painted. We can't tell at this distance, obviously. You'd have to stand in front of the painting to be able to work that out. The horizontal setting allows Giorgione to emphasize the landscape, which is what persuades many that it is by Giorgione. There we are. So the figures are confined to the bottom third, I would say, of the painting. The landscape certainly predominates. The colors are rather muted, but that could be the aging process, of course. Notice the breeze in the trees. Very subtle, but it is there. On a similar theme, this is the Judgement of Solomon, taken from the Old Testament. This painting is similar in composition, in so much as the most of the characters are again confined to the bottom third of the painting, whereas the top 2/3 are given over to landscape. This painting shows Solomon on the throne surrounded by his court and the two disputatious women at his feet. So there's the one woman, and there's the other one in the foreground there on her knees. And that's the one woman holding forth. They both claim ownership of the same child in their appeal to the king. Notice how the large oaks completely divide the painting. It's thought an assistant collaborated with Giorgione in painting the figures. A soldier holds the living child aloft. There we are. And you can see he's holding the child very awkwardly because well, the child is badly painted. He wouldn't hang from the soldier's arm like that. He's almost as though he's a cutout character, cutout figure. The other child, of course, is the dead child, is on the floor there. Nobody's interested in the dead child. The women are disputing the living child. And the soldier also, he's got his sword raised. So this is Solomon's, occasioned by Solomon's judgment. So the child is going to be cut in half as per the legend. And the real mother doesn't want that. She'd rather give up her child than the child is cut in half. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the story. So there's a lot of contrast in this painting. The colors are quite virulent. The colors of the garments, I should say, are quite virulent at the bottom, whereas the landscape is muted tones, apart from maybe the sky, but it's very, very bright on the extreme left there over the building. This painting is called the Adoration of the Shepherds. As with the previous two paintings, much of the canvas is again devoted to the Venetian landscape. And in this occasion, it's immersed in evening light. Giorgione portrays the main scene on the right in front of the dark grotto. So those are the shepherds. They're rather well-dressed shepherds, it seems to me, but there we are. And there's the Mary and Joseph and the child Jesus squashed into the right of the painting. And in the cave, we can just see heads of animals there, cows probably. Notice the angel in the top left-hand corner. There's a little angel there giving her blessing to the group. And again, the group, because their heads are bowed towards the Christ figure, you've got this triangle effect again, which is much beloved by classical painters of the 16th and 15th centuries. Most people, critics, attribute this work to Giorgione, though one or two art historians, including Berenson in 1937, thought it more typical of Titian, especially the landscape. But the colours are soft and luminous. It's rather a nice painting, I think. I like the colours in this painting. Even the sfumato effect is given, or technique is used for the rocks. The rocks all seem to be benign and soft. And I've just noticed this little figure sitting on a rock there. No matter how often you see these paintings, you always notice something different and something new if you allow yourself time. And certainly the distal blue of the mountains is painted less obviously than we saw earlier. This is boy with an arrow, but who is the boy? There has been much speculation over the centuries. Maybe Apollo, perhaps because of the arrow, it's Cupid. Notice the soft outline created by the Sfumato technique. However, Raphael's Saint Sebastian is strikingly similar. So this could be, Giorgione's could be Saint Sebastian. Both paintings show an introspective youth, head tilted to one side, holding a single arrow. And both paintings date from the same time and are similarly small, although it has to be said there is no halo in Giorgione's painting. So that's the Giorgione's is 19 by 17 and Raphael's is 17 by 13. More detail in Raphael's painting. I only put it there to show the possibility of the Giorgione's painting being of Saint Sebastian rather than simply boy with an arrow, which is how it's known. Now this painting is called Giovanni Borgherini and his tutor. It was probably commissioned by Giovanni's father, Salvi Borgherino, who it is known was in Venice with his son at 1504. However, Giovanni was 9 at the time, and I don't know what you think, but that looks a rather old face for a 9-year-old. The scroll, which is being pointed to by the tutor, there's his finger pointing straight to it. So this is obviously relevant, highly relevant. Giorgione wants us to take note of it. Reads, non valet, ingenium nisi, facta valebunt. And I haven't got enough Latin to be able to translate that, but others have. And it's translated as talent has no worth unless accomplishment follows. So talent is largely worthless unless you do something with it to achieve great things. And the boy is holding some sort of instrument, which relates presumably to his the lesson that he's learning at the moment. That looks like sort of astrolabe type instrument that the tutor is holding. This is simply called Portrait of a Man. Worth noticing his 5 o'clock shadow there and the soft skin tones, possibly influenced by Leonardo, it's claimed. The figure has a very similar enigmatic gaze as the Mona Lisa. The sitter is unknown. Not a particularly distinguished portrait, whoever painted it. So we'll pass on. The Adoration of the Magi. This was painted as a lower part of an altarpiece. The Virgin, Child, and Joseph sit on the left outside the stable. There they are. These are the 3 wise men. Caspar has already given myrrh to Joseph, who holds it in a glass jar. So this is Caspar, who's head bowed and in recognition of the fact he's handed over the gift. Melchior is almost entirely obscured. Now this is strange, isn't it? There is Melchior. He's almost entirely obscured by the figure of Caspar. You'd think that this was more likely to be, this high-profile character in green is more likely to have been Melchior, but that's not the case. He's got his hand on a golden bowl, and so he's going to present gold. There's no such ambiguity about Balthazar, who kneels further away with his gift of frankincense. What's curious about this painting is the attendants' rich attire, which typifies where they've come from, the East, I suppose, but they seem to distract from the central point of the painting. I mean, notice this groom here has got crossed legs. It's a curious way of painting him. And this groom here, or attendant, he seems to have a tear in his hose, which is an unusual detail for an altarpiece. Colours, of course, are bright and contrasting and link the various elements of the painting together. So we got blue on the left here, the blue of the holy couple, and the blue of the 2 attendants there. So the Magi, which are the main interest of the painting, they are They're not subordinated to the rest necessarily. It's a composition with several paintings. Notice the Joseph is painted slightly larger. He's not in perspective. The Virgin Mary is, but Joseph, to me, seems to be painted a little bit on the large side, and which is counterintuitive to the way he's actually sitting further back than the Virgin Mary. This is in the National Gallery, as you can see. It's quite small, 12 inches tall and nearly 3 foot long. This is also in the National Gallery, this sunset. And the National Gallery has something to say about this painting. The painting is very damaged and many areas are not original, it tells us. The 2 foreground figures are genuine and may represent, and I stress the word may there because I'm not convinced by it, Saint Roch and Gothardus. Now, if this is Saint Roch came to Italy at the time of plague to tend the sick, but he died in 1327. And it's said, according to the National Gallery, that he appears to be, the Gothardus appears to be dealing with a sore on Saint Roch's leg there. To me, I can just see 2 youths messing about on a rock. But who am I to argue with the National Gallery experts? I'm not very convinced by that. If these facts represent the genesis of the composition, the picture might have been painted to commemorate relief from the plague in Venice in 1504. After its discovery in 1930, in the 1930s, the painting underwent several phases of restoration. And you might wonder about this St. George and the Dragon suddenly appearing on the rock face there, on this ledge of the rock face. And he's been added at the time of restoration to cover a large area of damage. However, the National Gallery tells us the distant landscape with its atmospheric dissolution of light is evidence of Giorgione's work. And we've got that rather strong blue again there, which is reminiscent of a very early work of Giorgione. And the rock face, the rocks, the jagged angles of the rocks are softened by the sfumato effect. And it appears to be an animal in this in this bottom left-hand corner. It's not clear, but it appears to be an animal. Now, this is a far more distinct painting, as you can see. It's simply called The Old Woman. And the words on the small scroll in her hand reads, "Col tempo," which translated means "in the course of time." It suggests an allegorical interpretation. And she's definitely pointing to herself there. So she's, in other words, she's saying, look, this is what happens when time catches up with you. I'm sure we'll all sympathize with that a little bit. However, there is a 1569 inventory, so that's not that long after the painting was created. which states that the work is a portrait of Giorgione's mother. So it could possibly be Giorgione's mother. It's a very distinctive painting. There's no attempt to put any landscape in the background or any detail at all in the background. So this very dark umber background makes the whiteness of the hat and the shawl stand out particularly, and her teeth as well, it has to be said. So it's quite a striking portrait. The attribution of these next portraits has been hotly contested. Portrait of a young man. Over the centuries, this has been attributed to Giorgione's collaborator, Cariani, among other artists. The parapet at the bottom bears the inscription V on a shield, possibly the symbol of the Latin word virtus, meaning virtue or courage. Also an ancient Roman cameo. You can't see these in any detail, so you'll have to take my word for it. With a triple female head and a tiny cartouche bearing the name of the poet Antonio Baccardo. It's therefore highly likely that this is his likeness. This one is called Portrait of a Warrior and His Equerry in the Uffizi in Florence. It's curious how the equerry is, his attention is caught by something out of the picture on the extreme right, for whatever reason. And there's nothing really about this painting that suggests Giorgione painted it necessarily. Certainly not the subject matter. And look at this hand. Surely that little finger is too long, isn't it? To me, it looks too long. These next two I put together because they seem to go together like sister paintings. One called the Impassioned Singer and the other is called the Flute Player. They rather seem to be rather faded. That might be age, of course. That might be the result of age. Notice this figure on this head on the side there. So was this canvas been used previously for another painting, and for some reason this hasn't been washed out? I don't know. But some people, some critics, credit Giorgione with these two paintings. And this, you will see the figure on the right is carrying an instrument of some description. He's called a flute player, but there's not too much detail of about a flute there necessarily. Portrait of a young man in furs. It suggested that this is possibly a character called Anton Fugger, a German merchant. And again, Giorgione or whoever's painted this painting has gone to town on the fur, so that looks this Sfumato effect is working well there, I think. It certainly looks as though you could bury your fingers in that fur, I think. But we don't know who this man is, other than it's been suggested this Anton Fugger, and I know nothing about him. Christ carrying the cross. The attribution of this work has been disputed ever since the 16th century. So even shortly after it was painted, people were doubting that it was from the brushes of Giorgione. Vasari unhelpfully attributes it to both Titian and Giorgione. Jesus is portrayed with a cross on his shoulder. There's the cross in the background there, against a dark background, while an executioner is holding a noose around his neck for whatever reason. Notice the benign expression of Jesus, resigned to his fate, and this vicious expression of the two executioners or guards or whatever they are. Here we have Christ and the Adulteress. Now, Kelvin Grove in Glasgow acquired it in 1856 as a genuine Giorgione, but doubts were immediately expressed by some art critics. Berenson, we've already come across him once before, among others, thought it to be by Titian, though the confluence of colours doesn't seem to be very Titianesque. Others have attributed it to various Renaissance painters. So here we got the adulteress being thrust in front of Jesus. Jesus is in the temple teaching, and certain people, particularly this character here in the yellow, have brought him this adulteress and asks him a loaded question: should the adulteress who's been caught in the act of adultery, should she be stoned? And of course, Jesus answers famously, "You who are without sin must cast the first stone." And of course, nobody did throw any stones, and she wandered away. I think Jesus, my memory serves me right, Jesus told them to sin no more. We're coming to the end now. This is a self-portrait. So this is this is Giorgione himself as David. He's painted himself as David. And this portrait is generally thought to be authentic. It's mentioned in the inventory dating from 1528. So that's only within 20 years of it being painted. And it was seen by Vasari, who mentioned the subject holding Goliath's head. There's no head in this painting now, so it's obviously been cut away. But he did use it for the basis of a printed portrait of Giorgione in the second edition of his Lives of the Artists in 1568. Although he died in his 30s, Giorgione left a lasting legacy to be developed by Titian and other Italian artists. It said Giorgione never subordinated line and color to architecture, nor an artistic effect to a sentimental presentation. He was arguably the first Italian to paint landscapes with figures. Up until then, as I mentioned earlier, paintings were either devotional, allegorical, or historical. And he was the first whose colors possessed that ardent, glowing, and melting intensity which was so soon to typify the works of the Venetian school of the High Renaissance. And that's all I've got to say about Giorgione this morning.